biblical truth.
Shalom, shalom, indeed, indeed. Can y'all stand the rain, man? I got my brother swinging and banging from the land of Canaan. My brother James, the argument king, the killmonger of the source. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to him. He going to give y'all that heat rock, that flame, man. That presentation is about to be powerful. You guys tune in, get your notepad. Talk to him, James.
Oh man, I just want to say shalom to the family, man. Hope everybody had a good Sabbath, but now it's time to go to war, man. The other night on Bareen channel, we had a lot of talk going on from Kevin G. We know LeBron ain't show his face. He running from us. A lot of what it's crazy because a lot of what I was putting together in my presentation gonna deal with some of the things he was bringing up. Like the brother don't want to acknowledge that, E-marker's been in the Middle East since the most ancient of times. So I'm just gonna go into this presentation and break down who the House of Shem is, man.
Yes, indeed, man. Brother James about to give you guys that powerful presentation based on sources. They deal with rhetoric, we deal with sources.
All right, rise of a new theory. The human Y allopolymorphic Yap element is of particular interest in the study of human evolution due to its location in the non-recombinant region of the human Y chromosome. The frequencies of Y chromosomes carrying the Yap insertion element vary greatly among human populations from different geographic locations. Yap insertion chromosomes appear at low frequencies less than 10% in some Asians, Oceanians, and American Indians. Populations at an intermediate frequency, 11 to 25% in Eurasians, and a very high frequency, above 30% in the Japanese, Tibetans, and several African populations. The overall high frequency of Yap insertion chromosomes in sub-Saharan African populations led to the proposition that the original Yap insertion occurred on the African Y chromosome and subsequently spread to other continents. So they're saying it happened in Africa and then it left out. In contrast, Hammer and Athelhide and Hammer in another article hypothesized an alternate Asian origin. The lineage that acquired the Yap insertion polymorphism is divided into two subclusters: haplogroup E, found today in Africa and the Mediterranean, and haplogroup D, found in Japan and Southeast Asia. Y chromosome data on Indian population revealed that the parental lineages of present-day populations are predominantly derived from the original Indian gene pool rather than a recent influx. To elucidate the regional evolutionary history, we examine the Yap polymorphism in 21 Indian tribal populations. The ancestral allele of M174 found exclusively in Africa supports an African origin of Yap insertion, but the time of mutual events on the Asian Yap insertion chromosome, which Hammer talked about, gives antiquity to M174. Our findings of the preserve of the Yap insertion in Southeast Indian tribes and Andaman Islanders, which again, the other article was saying they didn't, but this article actually found them. In the Andaman Islanders with haplogroup D indicate that some of the M163 chromosomes have given rise to the Yap insertion and M174 mutation in South Asia. The presence of basal C, Yap insertion, and basal F in India suggests that Y chromosome and well differentiated into major lineages in South Asia, which they're pretty much saying CT split to CF and DE, and then DE split from D and E in Southeast Asia. Then they moved across Southeast Asia and the Andaman Islands. Adamese maternal lineages have been established through mitochondrial M31 lineage, which descends from RL3, with the eastern part of India in the Ragbashi, West Bengal, and the Pari, I don't know how to say that, of Orissa. After reaching the southern part of East Asia, descendants of the initial dispersal led to the northward diaspora, thus peopling across all of East Asia. Some of the Yap insertion chromosomes without the M174 mutation reached the Mediterranean via Central Asia and gave rise to the E lineages with the mutation M40 and M96. This E lineage migrated back to Africa through the Levant as hypothesized by Ethelhide and Hammer, And this is from the article Yap Insertion Signature in South Asia, published in 2004, the Anthropological Survey of India. All right, still going on with a rise of a new theory, because we're going to show that whole out of Africa theory is obsolete, and it is what is being used to keep us from our heritage as Shem. A consensus view that emerged that the genomes of present-day human populations outside of Africa originated almost entirely from a single major migration out around 50 to 70,000 years ago, occupied or followed soon after the mixture of Neanderthals, contributing 2% of the genome of all non-Africans. This admixture event is reliably dated from the length of the Neanderthal segments to 7,000 to 13,000 years before the time of the Ushima individual lived, which is 45,000 years ago. Thus, Neanderthal admixture took place between 52 to 58,000 years ago, and the migration out of Africa must have occurred earlier than the mixture. So now they're saying, hey, we got to push this migration back, like I've been saying in the other articles, 70,000 years. The admixed population then expanded rapidly across most of Eurasia and Australia. As a result, people were present over much of this vast region by 50,000 years ago. Genome-wide analysis of present-day populations show a steady decrease in genomic variation with traveling distance from Africa, and have been interpreted in terms of a serial founder model which predicted such a decrease. While such a pattern may have been initially established in this way, the complexity of subsequent movements and mixing events increasingly documented by ancient DNA from more recent periods suggests that any earlier pattern of population structure is unlikely to have persisted for more than 50,000 years. Thus, insights into present-day autosomal genomes into the initial out-of-Africa expansion are confounded by the complexity of subsequent prehistory. Suitable ancient DNA is not yet available, and alternative sources of information are needed. So a lot of these theories didn't have the information yet, but as I presented in some of the other articles earlier, we got it now. The serial founder model nevertheless provides a standard model by which alternatives can be compared. There is, however, one region of the genome that is potentially informing us of these events in a unique way, the Y-chromosome, which is another reason why, outside of the Most High telling us to call ourselves by our fathers, and that being our cultural tradition, is because the Y-chromosome is the most effective way to do so. This is because a male-specific portion provides haplotypes from which a detailed calibrated phylogenetic tree can be created. Several such branches have been constructed independently, and they're all consistent with being dominated by a massive expansion of non-African Y lineages, which during the key interval of 50 to 60,000 years ago, starting with a single haplogroup designated CT. So they're even saying that DE had to be out of Africa because CT is hypothesized as the parental group to both macro haplogroup CF and DE. And if you look over here in the chart, you can see that illustrated right above this area. Right here is the branch CT, which is to be the parent to DE and CF as they hypothesized. But again, we have no evidence of a CT or a BT anywhere in the fossil record. The phylogeography of the Y chromosome in Asia previously suggests that modern humans of African origin initially settled in mainland Southeast Asia, and about 25 to 30,000 years ago migrated northward, spreading throughout East Asia. However, the fragmented distribution of one East Asian specific Y chromosome lineage, D174, which is found at high frequencies in Tibet, Japan, and the Andaman Islands, is inconsistent with the scenario. We propose that DM174 has a southern origin, and its northward expansion occurred about 60,000 years ago, predating the northward migration of other major East Asian lineages. The Neolithic expansion of the Han culture, which is another descendant of Japheth, and the last glacial maximum are likely the key factors leading to the current relic distribution of DM174 in East Asia. And when they talk about the Han culture, they're pretty much talking about the Mongol Empire. Tibetan and Japanese populations are the admixture of two ancient populations represented by two major East Asian specific Y chromosomes, the O, which goes back to the CF lineages, and the D, which of course goes back to the DE lineages. Also pointing out what they said earlier, that CT, the hypothetical CT, was already outside of Africa. And this comes from a paper called A Southeast Asian Origin of Present-Day Non-African Human Y Chromosome, by Hung Shi, Huang Zhong, and others. And if you notice, people who seem to not be brought up in European schools of thought, which is not to their, I'm not knocking them for it because it was there before they were born, which has been indoctrinated with racist teachings and stuff like that. They have always just seen E as a haplogroup that's confined into Africa and it had nothing to do. But when you deal with someone from China that hasn't been brought up in that type of thinking, they firmly put it outside of Africa. And we'll see that a lot of European scholars are coming to the same conclusion as we saw before with our boy Vincent Cabrera. Right here, if you look at this chart right here, which I want to point out, the African ancestral lineages are A and B. That's who are African ancestors. As I was telling Kevin G online yesterday on Berean TV, and he was lying, saying no, they not. That no, I got to throw E in there. No, if you look at the Out of Africa event as shown on that chart, it happened with CT, and M168 includes DE and CF. So you're gonna have to get off that. The Y chromosome allopolymorphism, or Yap, also called M1, defines the deep-rooted haplogroup DE of the global Y chromosome phylogeny. This DE haplogroup is further branched into three subgroups: DE, D, and E, which is, we already went over that. I'm gonna skip over this. That chart was the major thing I wanted to get into. We talked about the Andamanese Islanders. Okay, I think this may be pertinent. Starting in the second column. However, a recent study reported that a high frequency of D174 in Andamanese people who lived in the remote islands of the Indian Ocean and considered one of the earliest modern human settlers of African origin in Southeast Asia. Another study by Underhill suggests that DM17 likely reached East Asia about 50,000 years ago, which implies that the Yap lineage in East Asia could be indeed very ancient. Our previous studies showed that the dominant and East Asian Pacific Y haplogroup OM175 reflect possibly the earliest modern human expansion in East Asia, unlike the presence of OM175 in most of the East Asian populations. Populations with relatively high frequencies of DM174 are mostly located at the peripheral regions of mainland East Asia, with fragmented distribution, implying two possible explanations of human prehistory. First, like OM175, DM174 may also be just one of the lineages going northward during the suggested Paleolithic migration of modern humans in East Asia. Subsequently, due to population substructure, the last glacial is likely a key factor, and recent expansion of Han culture and the distribution of DM174 was fragmented into current geographical pattern, which is pretty much saying these Han, or the people who are related to the Han cultures, wipe these people out. That's the reason that you find them way out there in Japan, but you're not finding them in Central Asia anywhere. You'll find them in the Andaman Islanders, where nobody has been dealing with them for what they say 60,000 years, but you're not finding them anywhere in the mid regions there. And it's because they're saying these old lineages came in and wiped them out, which we know a lot of them did. The one we proposed previously, to address this question, we conduct a systematic sampling of genetic analysis of more than 5,000 male lineages from 73 East Asian and Southeast Asian populations. Based on the Y chromosome, SNP, and the STR data, and the estimated ages of the major DM174 lineages, we propose that there was an independent Paleolithic northward migration of modern humans in East Asia, predating the previously suggested northward migration, which again goes to making it more ancient in time. Table 1 suggests that the reported Yap positive frequencies in worldwide populations refer to table note for references. Africans have a high frequency of Yap positive, and all of them belong to the subgroup EM40. In contrast, DM174 is a general East Asian specific with sporadic occurrences in adjacent regions. Example, Central Asia, Middle East, and Northeast India. The average frequency of M174 in East Asian is about 10%, in Tibet 41%, in Japan 35%, and in Andaman Island is 56%. But rare in other East Asian populations. After genotyping of the Y-chromosome biallelic markers, the 714 positive samples were assigned to 6 haplogroups: DE, EM40, D174, D1, M115, so on and so forth. Furthermore, typing the 8 loci of the 719 Yap positive generated the complete data sets of 697 samples consistent with the previous reports, and the prevalence of DM174 is mostly in Western and Southern China and Japan, which again, they were conduced down to these regions. And I just want to go over this a bit because we want to also highlight our brothers of the D haplogroup and not spend all our time focusing on E, because they are our Shemitic brothers at the end of the day. This distribution patterns, the 4 D haplogroups, which I just want to highlight, the Tibeto-Burden and the DX speaking peoples, they also carry these haplogroups, and I'm going to move forward in the presentation because I'm really trying to get through as much as I possibly can. And this is just the graph and the table that was mentioned beforehand, actually giving the same numbers I just read. It should be noted that the estimated gene diversity is subject to potential bias in the age difference of the DM17 lineages. The finding of the 2 DE in Tibet, which was only observed in Africa, supports the antiquity of DM174, which again, they were saying they found 1 in Africa. So Africa had to be the origin, but again, now we're finding 2 in Tibet. So using that same logic, we put the origin more in that direction into East Asia. Additionally, the biased distribution of D174 and its ancient coalescence time suggests that an independent Paleolithic migration of modern humans in East Asia. All right, this is another graph that is showing the distribution of D, again, to highlight our other Shemitic brothers that for some reason didn't decide to farm like us and wanted to be hunters and gatherers like everybody else. All right, again, like I said, I'm going to skip over this because I want to really get into it. And just a summary, because this is the paper I use. In summary, we demonstrated in the ancient Paleolithic population migrated in East Asia, predating the previously suggested northern population migration. The current fragmented distribution of DM174 is likely due to the combination of later Neolithic population expansion and the last glacial maximum. And this is from Y-chromosome evidence of the earliest modern human settlement in East Asia and multiple origins of Tibet and Japanese populations. All right, going into the next article, still focusing on hammering home this new theory, which is placing us outside of Africa. When the tree is calibrated in the mutation rates per base pair per year, the time to the most recent common ancestor of the tree is 190,000 years ago. But we consider the implications of alternative mutation rate estimates below. Of the clades resulting from the 4 deepest branching events, all but 1 are exclusive to Africa. And the most recent common ancestor of all non-African lineages, that is, the most recent common ancestor of, again, non-African lineages, DE and CF, is 76,000 years. They always put them around at 70,000 years ago range. We saw a notable increase in the number of lineages outside of Africa 50 to 55,000 years ago, perhaps reflecting a geographical expansion and differentiation of Eurasian populations as they settled the vast expanse of these continents. Consistent with previous proposals, a parsimonious interpretation of the phylogeny is that the predominantly African haplogroup E arose outside the continent as a model of geographical segment within the CT clade requires just one continental haplogroup exchange of E rather than 3 of D, C, and F out of Africa, which again deals with parsimony. We don't want to use one that has to make 3 assumptions. We can go with one that aligns with the evidence and has one provable assumption. which is that E went back to Africa, because we know that's true because they're there right now. Furthermore, the timing of this putative return to Africa between the emergence of haplogroup E and its differentiation within Africa by 58,000 years ago is consistent with proposals based on non-Y chromosome data, which is the mitochondrial data, of abundant gene flow between Africa and nearby regions of Asia 50 to 80,000 years ago. And I'm just using this to, again, you got to have 2 or 3 witnesses in our culture, and these are my 2 or 3 witnesses. And this is from punctuated bursts in human male demography inferred from 1,244 worldwide Y chromosome sequences, Nature Genetics 2016 by David Posnick and others. Moving on. Since a decade ago, the field of ancient DNA has flourished with unprecedented success in sequencing genome-wide data from ancient specimens, which is why now that it's coming out, it's more flushed out. We can clearly see the models, understand the models, is why we really started leaning towards now putting out this information, because a lot of it, like if anyone went and seen my presentation on Global Media Inc., which is like 6-7 years old, I was talking about this, but they didn't have all the DNA data out. I hadn't done the thorough research to build a model yet to go more into the DNA. I was just saying, well, the cranials, and the more ancient the cranials are, the more they align with the DNA. The cranials are showing this. The cranials are pointing this out. The culture is showing this. The culture is pointing this out. And now I have the DNA to back that up. And it's because of the expansion of DNA over the recent decade. The majority of the research is focused on past humans, both modern ones with a close relationship with one or more present-day populations, as well as archaic ones that no longer live today, such as Neanderthals. With a growing pool of genomic data from past humans from many different times and locations, it is increasingly possible to study the large-scale patterns of human prehistory and associated trends over time and space, which is what we're doing now. A new review published in Trends in Genetics, produced by Professor F.U., I don't know how to say that, I ain't gonna butcher it, and Dr. Melinda Yang at the Molecular Paleontology Lab of the Chinese Academy of Science Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology, contextualizes much of the research to date, providing a comprehensive understanding of major features of human genomic prehistory. Their review covers the genetic patterns and relationships that have been uncovered regarding human prehistory over the last few years, focusing on ancient genetic studies of 45,000 to 7,500 years ago. Humans from primary pre-agricultural cultures. They don't really, they don't go deep into basal, but again, I gotta focus on this map, because if you look up here, this is 45 to 35,000 years ago. These European CF lineages, where do they have them at? Up in Europe. Aze-1 is a European lineage. Uchima is a European lineage. This is a European lineage. All of these, but basal Eurasian is by itself in the Near East. I want everyone to see that. There's no European lineages, no African lineages of A and B. Is basal Eurasian there. And as you come through time and you go to the next one, 35 to 15,000 years, look, basal Eurasian still dominate. We got European lineages already coming to the Americas, and basal Eurasian is still dominating the Near East. But what happens when you get down to 14,000 to 7,500 years ago? Look at that European expansion right there. From the Europeans that were initially up in Europe, then now they're expanding down to Serbilia, around Georgia, where you're going to find J markers, G markers, and C markers migrating down. And then we know basal Eurasian has disappeared, but we see it by the highlight on the left side of the Natufians. And you can see from Serbilia that they've actually integrated into these two populations. We know the Natufians are purely E lineages. They hypothesized some CT, but again, that was just a placeholder because they didn't really know what to categorize it as. But it's mainly E lineage. And then when you get to some of which would be later Iranian Neolithic Iranians, we find some J markers, but we also have a lot of E lineages there too. But going into it, a climatic conditions warmed after the last glacial maxims by 14,000 years ago, more connections appear across Eurasia. Ancient Europeans show connection to present-day populations in East Asia and the Near East. Some ancient Eastern European individuals possess potential Northern Eurasian ancestry. That's European, without a doubt. And individuals in the Caucasus began to show partial ancestry related to basal Eurasians, which means they started to relate, to mix with them. And we find this in ancient Iran. And even by the tradition of our ancestors, they say the Medes, which are descendants of Japheth, settled in northwest Iran. And it seems to be also lining up with the genetic data, which is why it made our model just pop like that, which made it pop off the paper to us to be like, no, we gotta build it. Eurasian population for which no direct examples are samples are available, but who separated very early from other non-Africans, which would be the CF lineages and the D lineage, and are potentially represented in all recent Europeans and Near Easterners. Research focused on the phenotypes associated with different genetic variants also reveals some surprising results, such as Europeans as recent as 75,000 years ago still possess dark skin, for you skin doctor folks like Kevin G, who told us that we not related to E1B1B because Albert Einstein is white. That's what he pretty much told us. 75,000 years ago, dark skin and blue eyes occurred as early as 14,000 years ago. Also, 75,000-year-old European ancestry with dark skin in Spain also possess blue eyes in combination not observed today, because we don't really see people due to Roman expansion and wiping folks out. And this is from How Ancient Genomics Unveils the Prehistory of Human, Bulletin of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Volume 32, Issue 1, 2018. Up to date, baby. We ain't using this outdated stuff. This indicates that the Holocene Levantine populations overlapping or post-dating the Tafouralt samples by up to 6,000 years are most closely related to Tafouralts among the Near Eastern populations. Next, we tested if the Tafouralt individuals, and again, I'm saying the sources afterwards. I don't want nobody to get confused and think this right here is coming from How Genomics Unveils the Prehistory. No, I'll say this source after I'm done. Tafouralt amongst Near East pop. Next, we test the Tafouralt individuals have sub-Saharan African ancestry, and this right here, I'll give away the article now. Is the article about the links between the Near East and sub-Saharan African, which they are found in this Tafouralt sample. We observed significant positive values for all sub-Saharan African and significant negative values for all Eurasian populations, supporting a substantial contribution from sub-Saharan Africa. West Africans, such as Mende and Yoruba most strongly pull out the sub-Saharan African ancestry in the Tafouralt. But which this article is going to go into it and others, but I want to focus in on this right here. You have the Middle Easterns over here, but you have West Africans over here. But the Tafouralt is in the middle, which makes it look like it should be in a basal position too. And we know the Near Easterns are E1B1B and the West Africans are E1B1A, which to me leaves only EP2 to be put there as basal to both and be the link between West Africa and the Near East. And it just makes sense because it's the parents of both. The results from the principal component analysis that are based on African populations to construct the principal components show that the Tafouralt individuals do not cluster with any present-day population. Instead, they take an intermediate position, like I said, between present-day North Africans and Sub-Saharan Africans. Specifically, they are flanked by North African Mozambique and Sahrawi, man, I butchered that, and by East African Afars on the Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan African direction, respectively. The East African groups Afar, Omro, and Somali, as well as 3,000-year-old individual from Tanzania, are the closest to Tafouralt from the Sub-Saharan African side. And I want to point out the East African branch of E1B1A is a lot more ancient than the West African branch, which would probably explain why it's the most closely related to it out of the sub-Saharan Africa. For these East African groups, which together with Tafouralt take intermediate positions between sub-Saharan Africans and Western Eurasians. So they take that intermediate position as well. Genetic links with the Near East have been proposed. These links include an introduction of early Neolithic Levant-like ancestry associated with the spread of pastoralism into East Africa 4,000 years ago and South Africa 2,000 years ago. A more recent link is the spread of Bronze Age Levantine-like ancestry in sub-Saharan Africa, together with agriculture during the Bantu expansion. Hey, you might gonna have to give me a bomb on this one. I want to hear something explode, because they always talking to us about, oh, there's no Levantine ancestry in sub-Saharan Africa, but hold up, they saying it right here. A more recent link is the spread of Bronze Age Levantine-like ancestry in sub-Saharan Africa, together with agriculture during the Bantu expansion, bro. Bronze Age Levant gene pool has been proposed to be a mixture of the Neolithic Levant with individuals related to Caucasus hunters and gatherers and early Neolithic farmers from Iran. Again, the basal Eurasians I was just telling y'all about, and from Anatolia. They had mixed with all these populations. To obtain an alternative summary of the Tafouralt gene pool, we also conducted an unsupervised genetic clustering of global populations admixture version 1.3.0. We removed duplicate individuals and individuals with a genotype missing rate greater than 95% using Planck version 1.9. We also performed a linkage disequilibrium based SNP pruning using the independent pairwise 220.2 option in Planck, which is something I ain't gonna act like I understand. I just know they did it though. Leaving 3,080 individuals and 201,361 SNPs to be analyzed. We reduced 354 diploid and haploid calls by randomly sampling one allele to reduce the impact of artificial genetic drift in haploid ancient individuals on our clustering results. We ran 5 replicates, different random seeds for each K values ranging from 2 to 15, and took the replicant with the highest log. Based on our results, we hypothesized that the ancient Tafouralt individuals have a strong genetic affinity both with early Levantine, Holocene Levantine groups and sub-Saharan Africans. Also, the sub-Saharan African ancestry in the Tafouralt individuals may have links with multiple sub-Saharan African lineages, which is almost all of them, because E1B1A. Therefore, we conclude that the early Holocene Levantine populations who post-date our Tafouralt individuals by up to 6,000 years are most closely related to Tafouralt among Eurasian populations in our data set. We also calibrate to explore the affinity of Tafouralt with African populations. Uchima is the Upper Paleolithic Siberian individual dated to 45,000 years ago before present day East Asians. In this case, North African populations, such as the Saharaui and the Mozambique, show the highest frequency of allele frequency with the Tafouralt, suggesting similarity in their genetic profiles. This matches well with their close positions in the principal component analysis plot 11. Following this, West African populations show outgroup values. We found strong evidence suggesting the sub-Saharan African affinity in the Tafouralt by comparing this outgroup with that of the Natufians. While Eurasian populations tightly fall on one line, all African populations clearly deviate from this line. This suggests that sub-Saharan Africans, most notably West Africans, share ancestry with Tafouralt beyond what could be explained by their Neanderthal-like ancestry. So it got to be something more ancient than that. And they're going to go into it. Next, we formally test if the Tafouralt individuals have sub-Saharan African ancestry by calculating. As expected, we observed significant positive values for all sub-Saharan Africans and significant negative values for all Eurasian populations. A reduced level of Neanderthal ancestry cannot be the sole explanation for that, because we find, oh, and I want to point this out. The F7 is just the sample group. And I had someone on Clubhouse ask me, how can I trust ancient DNA when they use things like chimpanzees in their studies? What this is called is an out group in it, right? Is a group that nothing is supposed to be able to tie back to. So you use that in there as a control, right? Because if your test is still tying back to a chimpanzee, something's wrong. So this is used to tell you something's wrong, right? So I just want to educate people on that, because if that's what's holding you back from studying DNA, I want to make that clear. We find that it is not significant and positive. Our results clearly support a dual ancestry for our Tafouralt individuals, genetically related to both early Holocene Near Easterners and present-day Sub-Saharan Africans. So the Tafouralt is the link. So anybody who's trying to take us away from that is tripping. And I think it was the day before yesterday, I was listening to the conversation, Jashoub, you can correct me if I'm wrong, between y'all and LaRon. And LaRon was talking about the Ibero-Maurusians, right?
Yes, he brought up the Ibero-Maurusians to his own detriment.
Exactly, because the Tafouralt samples are from the Ibero-Maurusians, right?
Yep.
And they are partially Sub-Saharan Africa, and they were across all of North Africa and the Middle East, right?
Correct.
So he checkmated himself. I just wanted to point that out.
Right.
Among all the possible no 14 admixture, the two-way admixture models on this scuffle graph, the best model for the Tafouralt is the mixture of Natufian and Yoruba, with a 30% contribution from a Yoruba-related branch consistent with the results. The best graph still deviates from the observed data in some statistics, but the outlier statistics do not suggest an unexplained extra affinity between Tafouralt and Western hunter-gatherers, because they also always trying to throw these Indo-Europeans in there somewhere, because they was trying to swear that the Tafouralt had to be Indo-European, because they was trying to have some Indo-European so they could take credit for civilization, the progression of civilization to Africa, but they ain't got it. Likewise, adding additional gene flow from a relative Western hunter-gatherer related branch into Tafouralt results is no increase in the model fit, with zero contribution estimated. So Indo-Europeans ain't got nothing to do with the Tafouralt. It is surprising that we observe a high proportion. We went over this already. I'm really hammered on, but I'm going to read the last sentence. Well, no, I'll go start with the second sentence in the thing. Also, a periodic expansion of the Sahara Desert played a role in the limited gene flow between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa throughout time. For example, a previous study of ancient Egyptian genome shows the genetic affinity with Near Eastern is even greater in the first millennium BC in Egypt. Importantly, our Tafouralt individuals predate the most recent greening of the Sahara by several thousand millennia. Thus, we may speculate that the Sub-Saharan African ancestors of Tafouralt derived from a gene pool of pre-last glacial maximum Africans. All right. Remember, they was talking about the split of DE. That's right before the last glacial maximum, or right around that time period of when it's, or during it. So, who belong to the Middle Stone Age cultures. Therefore, we conclude that none of the South, Central, and East African groups is a sister group of the Sub-Saharan African ancestors in the Tafouralt, given that our Tafouralt individual outdate even the most ancient Holocene African individual, which is Motoboy, by over 10,000 years. This result is not surprising. A long-term gene flow between the various Sub-Saharan African groups during the Holocene period is very likely to have generated a pattern that is not easily modeled as a rather simple admixture graph. So they're saying it might be a little bit more complicated than that. Finally, we conclude any ancestry more basal than the deepest known modern human ancestry represented by the South African and present-day Khoisan speakers in South Africa as an additional source for the Tafouralt gene. Because remember, I've spoken about it I don't know if I brought it on the presentation, but I spoke about it numerous times. They talk about a quote-unquote basal West African that gave rise to sub-Saharan Africans, and that's who they're actually speaking of in this right here article. Such a basal ancestry will generate negative affinity with the South African ancestry, not the positive one we observe in our statistics, because such a deep ancestry is an outgroup to both South African and any mixture of Yoruba and Neanderthals. So will have a negative value. Examples of such a deep ancestry includes any unknown archaic hominid or a hypothetical deep, this is it right here, hypothetical deep West African branch suggested by Scotland to explain the asymmetrical relationship between Eurasian populations to Yoruba and the Mende. See, they're saying there's an asymmetrical relationship to the two of us, so we're linked. So all y'all got to let that go. Y'all got to quit trying to hide the connection between the Near East and Sub-Saharan Africa, which goes back to before we was even in Sub-Saharan Africa. Therefore, these hypothetical ancestry, even if they existed, cannot be used to fully categorize the Tafouralt gene flow, which again, I'm pushing for EP2.